Hey guys, tonight we're plunging deep into mystery. No diving gear, no GPS, just your imagination and a touch of ancient rumor. Picture this: an island paradise with gleaming temples, golden statues, and elephants roaming lush gardens. Palaces float on canals, the air tastes like warm salt and cinnamon. And somewhere, a bell tolls underwater, echoing across eternity. You've heard of it, Atlantis. The city that sank beneath the waves and took all its secrets with it. You probably won't survive this if you're looking for straight answers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the halls of ancient Athens, well, through Plato's words, at least. It's around 360 BCE, and you're sitting cross-legged, listening to an old philosopher tell stories that seem equal parts lecture and bedtime tale. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, Plato drops the bombshell. Over 9,000 years ago, there was a mighty civilization beyond the Pillars of Heracles, known today as the Strait of Gibraltar. Atlantis, the city, he says, was more advanced than anything Greece had ever seen: ships, grand architecture, divine laws. Its kings were descended from Poseidon himself. Because apparently ocean real estate needs a god on the deed. But pride got the best of them. They tried to invade Athens, and the gods, displeased, sent earthquakes and floods that swallowed Atlantis whole in a single day and night. Talk about an overreaction. Historians still argue whether Plato meant Atlantis as an allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris and imperial ambition, or whether he was referencing a folk memory of a real disaster. One mainstream theory holds that Atlantis might reflect stories passed down after the destruction of a major civilization, like the Minoans, by natural catastrophe. Still, a few curious facts pop up. Plato claimed he got the story from his ancestor Solon, who supposedly heard it in Egypt from temple priests. Solon was a real Athenian statesman. He did travel. Egypt did have long memory, and its priests did like to brag. But even so, the trail is already a little damp and crumbling at the edges. Enter the first quirk. Atlantis was never mentioned in any Greek text before Plato. Not once. For a city so supposedly immense and influential. That's odd. It's like finding a new continent in your backyard but only telling your cousin at dinner. And yet, here we are, because once Plato put it out there, the idea took root like a seed in wet stone. Some scholars nod politely and move on. Others start seeing sunken temples in every puddle. The Renaissance especially went nuts over Atlantis. And from that point on, no one could quite let it go. The idea was just too juicy. A perfect society, punished by the gods, a paradise lost to time. Plus, let's be honest, who doesn't want to believe there's something glittering under the ocean, waiting to be found? You picture yourself, flashlight in hand, brushing sand off a marble eye socket that hasn't seen daylight in 12,000 years. Chills. Or maybe that's just the fan you turned on earlier. The funny thing is, Plato ends the Critias dialogue mid-sentence. Scholars don't know if he got bored, died, or just forgot. There's no ending. Just poof. And in that silence, Atlantis grew louder. So tonight, you'll follow the myth through time, over shipwrecks and through ancient libraries, past volcanoes, sonar scans, Nazi bunkers, and New Age temples in the Nevada desert. And you'll ask, if Atlantis never existed, why do so many of us feel like we're still trying to get back there? You squint against the salty breeze, stepping off your dream boat and onto the shimmering causeway of Atlantis. It's dazzling, like a Mediterranean Las Vegas designed by ancient deities. Gold gleams from temple walls. Ivory statues wink from lush gardens. The roads? paved in a rare red stone that somehow glows in the dark. And the canals, oh, the canals, make Venice look like a puddle in someone's backyard. Plato gave us the specs. And you have to admit, they're oddly precise for something supposedly made up. Atlantis, he wrote, was a massive island with a series of concentric rings, 3 of water, 2 of land, surrounding the central Acropolis. Think of a bullseye with a palace where the dart hits. Bridges connected each ring, and huge gates controlled entry. It was a marvel of engineering, especially for a city that may never have existed. At the heart stood the Temple of Poseidon, big enough to make the Parthenon feel insecure. Inside, a colossal statue of the god, astride a chariot drawn by winged horses, or possibly dolphins, translations differ, dominated the room. Around it, citizens paid homage with sacrifices, parades, and what we can only assume were ancient pool parties with disturbingly high levels of self-confidence. Plato claimed Atlantis was blessed with everything: plentiful timber, elephants, exotic fruits, hot and cold springs, hello, spa day, and rare metals, including orichalcum, a mystical alloy supposedly second only to gold. Historians still argue whether orichalcum was a real material. Some think it might have been copper, zinc, brass, or even a lost smelting method from prehistory. But let's face it, the name alone makes you want to invent a video game about it. This abundance led to wealth. Wealth led to pride. Pride, well, you can probably see where this is going. According to the tale, Atlanteans grew arrogant. They built ships and armies and started eyeing their neighbors. The gods watched. Tisk tisk. And one day, just as they were about to conquer the known world, Atlantis was wiped out by a single cataclysm: earthquakes, floods, and then silence. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing your entire continent had ghosted the planet. Modern geologists remind us that such events aren't outlandish. Earthquakes and tsunamis have literally erased civilizations. Just ask the Minoans of Santorini. But we'll get to them soon. Meanwhile, Plato's tale gives no date. Just 9.000 years before Solon. Conveniently vague and possibly symbolic. Still, some fringe theorists insist that ancient civilizations did exist during the last ice age and were destroyed by rising seas. Mainstream archaeology mostly files that under romantic nonsense, though some are warming to the idea that Ice Age humans were more complex than we thought. Here's your quirky fact of the night. In the 1800s, a German inventor named Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. In it, he argued that Atlantis was the source of all world civilizations: Egyptian pyramids, Mayan temples, you name it. To Donnelly, everything started with Atlantis, and history has been one long scavenger hunt since. His book sold like hotcakes. Seriously, it was ancient TikTok energy, viral before electricity. But back to you. You stand now on one of those concentric land rings, feeling the marble under your feet, the sea mist in your nostrils. You can almost hear the Atlantean marketplace in full swing, vendors hawking glowing fish, floating lanterns bobbing through alleyways, some guy yelling about dolphin taxes. But then, the tremor hits. Not a warning, not a slow rumble, just crack. The bridges twist, statues topple, water surges in, washing over grand staircases. Panic, screams, and then an eerie stillness. The kind that only follows total annihilation. If Atlantis really existed, where did it go? Shouldn't there be ruins? Plates, coins, stone graffiti saying, Neptune was here. Well, that's the thing. Despite sonar scans, deep dives, and lots of dramatic documentaries narrated by gravelly British voices, no confirmed Atlantean artifacts have ever been found. Zip. Nada. Just tantalizing maybes and a mountain of what if. Still, Plato's tale has an echo of truth. The kind of echo you hear when standing near something vast, sunken, and possibly real. Because even if Atlantis never existed, The idea of it has shaped how we imagine perfect societies, epic failures, and the mysterious balance between the two. And that's only the beginning. Because when a legend drowns, the hunt to find it always floats to the surface. You brush away sea spray, maybe sweat, as you trudge through centuries of human obsession. The city may be lost, but the chase? Very much alive. You're no longer in ancient Greece, but standing in the cramped, candlelit study of a 13th century monk poring over dusty texts, cross-referencing Herodotus and throwing in a few apocalyptic predictions for good measure. Atlantis, by the Middle Ages, was already more than a story. It was a symbol, a temptation, and a riddle that refused to shut up. You fast forward to the age of exploration. Think conquistadors with rusty maps, whispering of sunken empires and forbidden knowledge. You overhear a ship captain in 1492 mutter that maybe Atlantis lies just west of the Canary Islands. His crew laughs, but not too loud, because what if it does? The Atlantic Ocean was named after Atlas. After all, coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe history's way of leaving a breadcrumb trail soaked in saltwater and madness. Mainstream scholars will tell you that for centuries, Atlantis was treated more like speculative philosophy than a real destination. But that didn't stop anyone. In fact, the mystery got juicier the more the evidence stayed just out of reach. By the 19th century, the obsession went full steam. Enter Ignatius Donnelly? Remember him from earlier? The man treated Atlantis like the Rosetta Stone of civilization. In his mind, the lost city didn't just influence the old world, it practically gave birth to it. Language, architecture, mythologies, all Atlantis. Baby. Fringe as that sounds, Donnelly's book inspired a cultural avalanche. Poets, scholars, and adventurers suddenly started spotting Atlantis everywhere. Under the sea near the Azores, in the Caribbean, and even beneath Ireland. Atlantis fever gripped the 1800s the same way crystal healing grips Etsy right now. Historians still argue whether this sudden explosion of interest was fueled by genuine inquiry or good old-fashioned escapism. The Industrial Revolution had changed everything. After all, smog, factories, existential dread, a glorious lost paradise sounded awfully comforting. Now let's jump a century forward. Picture a man in khaki shorts, pith helmet tilted just so, tapping a sonar screen in a 1970s submarine. This is the age of high-tech treasure hunting. Scuba divers, amateur archaeologists, and even retired naval officers took to the seas with the firm conviction that this time they'd crack it. One particularly infamous expedition happened near Bimini in the Bahamas. In 1968, divers found a series of large, flat stones beneath the water. They called it the Bimini Road. Rectangular, seemingly deliberate. Atlantis? The tabloids screamed yes. Geologists calmly replied no, it's a natural formation. Probably. Maybe. Honestly. They're still arguing about it at conferences with terrible coffee and great PowerPoint animations. And then came Google Earth. Yes, even Atlantis got its digital makeover. Around 2009, an eagle-eyed user spotted what looked like a grid pattern on the seafloor off the coast of Africa. It made headlines. Speculation exploded. Atlantis had finally been located. Using satellite maps and a bit of imagination. Alas, Google later clarified it was a sonar artifact from ship mapping. Not an ancient city. But hey, A+ for effort and pixel-level hope. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the early 2000s, a man in Spain built an entire resort themed around Atlantis. Faux temples, watery murals, even a Poseidon-themed bar. It tanked. Turns out, even the myth of Atlantis can't pay for dry martinis and bad seafood. But still, you wonder, why can't we let go? Why do people in quiet suburbs and coastal villages whisper about Atlantean ruins? Draw maps in notebooks, and hoard crystals shaped like tridents? Maybe it's because Atlantis taps into something primal. The idea that we once had it all, and lost it. That beneath all our modern chaos, there's a blueprint for balance, hidden somewhere in the mud. Maybe we think if we find Atlantis, we'll somehow find ourselves. And so the hunt continues. Through pages, screens, dive logs, and dreams, you sit now on the deck of a boat somewhere in the Mediterranean, listening to sonar pings echo like heartbeats. Below you lies nothing, or everything. The sea keeps its secrets your waist deep in warm volcanic ash. Sandals full of pumice, staring at a broken fresco that seems to whisper across millennia. Welcome to Santorini, ancient Thera. The island that may just be Atlantis in disguise. This place is like the poster child for, maybe Atlantis, theories. In the late Bronze Age, it was home to the Minoans, a wildly advanced civilization with running water, multi-story buildings, and art so refined it makes you wonder if they invented Instagram 3.000 years early. Then, around 1600 BCE, the island exploded, literally. The eruption of Thera is one of the largest volcanic events in recorded human history. It ripped the island apart, launched ash into the stratosphere, and likely caused tsunamis that devastated nearby coastal communities, especially on Crete. Just a ferry ride away. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether this eruption inspired Plato's tale. The timeline is off, by thousands of years, but oral traditions have long memories. Especially when they involve fireballs, drowning cities, and gods behaving badly. Let's slow it down and really look at what happened. You walk through the ruins of Akrotiri, a Minoan city on Santorini that was perfectly preserved under ash. Pompeii style. There are painted walls, kitchen tools, even furniture. No bodies, though. Residents apparently fled before the worst hit. Smart move. And unlike Pompeii's citizens, they didn't bring their bad luck into the fossil record. Some scholars think these Minoan cities were the real-life seed for Atlantis. Ringed ports, skilled sailors, sophisticated plumbing. Seriously, they had flushing toilets before Rome. And then, catastrophe. Earthquakes, floods, silence. Mainstream theory? This might be what Plato was echoing. A real event, remembered and reshaped over centuries, finally landing in a philosophy book as a cautionary allegory. But here's the fringe twist. Not everyone buys it. For starters, Plato said Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia combined. Santorini is not, unless Plato was doing ancient math in dog years. The size just doesn't fit. Also, Atlantis supposedly existed 9.000 years before Solon. Thera? Just a toddler compared to that timeline. Still, the coincidences pile up. The advanced society, the sudden destruction, the sea swallowing everything. You picture Minoan priests watching the skies darken, hearing the sea pull back in a strange hush before the wave came. And then there's Crete, home base for the Minoan civilization. It bore the brunt of the Thera eruption's aftermath. Entire palaces were abandoned, trade routes vanished, civilization staggered. Not exactly a lost continent, but certainly a lost something. Your quirky tidbit? One of the murals in Akrotiri shows blue monkeys frolicking in the trees. We're not entirely sure why. Scholars think it could be a sign of trade with Egypt or sub-Saharan Africa. Or maybe they just had weird pets. Either way, it's a delightful detail from a civilization that felt no need to explain its choices. So, is Santorini Atlantis? If you go by geological plausibility, it's a strong candidate. It checks the natural disaster box, the advanced society box, and the disappeared suddenly box. But Plato's description seems to point west of the Mediterranean, not smack in its middle. Plus, Santorini didn't vanish beneath the sea entirely, it just changed shape. Atlantis, as Plato tells it, was gone, like a ghost at low tide. Still, the vibe is there. You close your eyes and imagine the Minoans' last sunset, the horizon glowing blood orange, the ground trembling, the water boiling in the harbors. You hear distant screams, the crack of collapsing walls, and then the thunderous roar of a mountain tearing itself open. Maybe Plato didn't get all the facts right. Maybe the dates are off. The size exaggerated, the names poetic. But myths don't live in spreadsheets. They live in feelings, in awe and loss and warning. So when people point to Santorini and say, Atlantis was here, they might not mean it literally. They might mean, here was once beauty, and brilliance, and peace, until it wasn't. And if that isn't Atlantis, it's close enough to haunt you. You blink sand out of your eyes and step into an entirely different scene. No crashing waves. No volcanic ash. Just heat. Blistering, bone-dry heat. The kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and your brain melt into conspiracy theories. Welcome to the Sahara Desert, where some believe the real Atlantis has been hiding in plain sight, disguised as a giant, ancient swirl in the dirt. It's called the Richat structure, or the Eye of the Sahara. From space, it looks like a massive bullseye, a series of concentric circles spanning over 25 miles. You probably saw it once as a desktop wallpaper and assumed it was photoshopped. But it's real, and to the internet's delight, it looks suspiciously like Plato's description of Atlantis. So of course, modern Atlantis enthusiasts, armed with Google Earth and a healthy disregard for peer-reviewed journals, have declared, this is it. We've found the lost city. And it's not underwater. It's buried in African sand. Now, here's where it gets juicy. The Richat structure wasn't widely known until astronauts spotted it from orbit in the 1960s. Since then, people have marveled at its perfect rings. Scientists believe it's a natural geological formation caused by erosion and uplift. But the internet? It believes in Atlantis. The theory goes something like this. Thousands of years ago, the Sahara was green, full of lakes, rivers, and hippos. This isn't fantasy. That part's true. It was called the African humid period, and it transformed the desert into a habitable paradise. If a civilization like Atlantis ever existed inland rather than offshore, this is where it could have thrived. And when the climate shifted, poof, sandstorm buffet. Historians still argue whether the eye could even theoretically match Plato's Atlantis. The rings match the layout. The size roughly works. And the location? South of the Strait of Gibraltar. Check. But the part where Atlantis sinks beneath the sea doesn't quite fit unless we stretch sea to mean sea of sand. Creative, but risky. Like explaining your bad grades were part of a long-term psychological experiment. And then there's Antarctica. Yes, you knew we'd go there. Some theorists believe Atlantis lies beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, crushed under miles of snow like a lost time capsule. The idea leans heavily on Charles Hapgood's Earth crust displacement theory, basically. That the outer shell of Earth can slide around like the top of a bad Jell-O mold. According to this theory, Antarctica was once farther north, temperate, and home to a thriving Atlantean empire. Then, whoops, pole shift. Instant freezer burn. The theory gained traction when it got a weird shout-out from none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote a foreword to Hapgood's book. But before you pack your parka and chisel, just know, mainstream scientists do not consider this idea, well, scientific. Antarctica has been frozen for at least a few million years. Not ideal for advanced maritime nations. Still, maps like the infamous Piri-Reis map, drawn in 1513, have been dragged into the argument. Some claim it shows an ice-free Antarctica with suspicious detail. Others argue it's just a distorted sketch of South America. You can imagine the debates, one guy with a laser pointer, another with 3 types of coffee and a grudge. Your quirky tidbit for tonight? There's a legend among the Dogon people of Mali, an oral tradition that speaks of beings from the stars who taught them science and agriculture. While often hijacked by ancient alien theories, you knew those were coming. Some Atlantis hunters point to this as evidence that a pre-flood civilization once existed across Africa. To which most historians say, Please stop emailing me. But jokes aside, here's what sticks. Atlantis refuses to stay in one place. Every continent has claimed it. Every culture has echoed its themes: pride before the fall, paradise lost, power punished, whether under the sea, beneath the ice, or buried in dunes. The myth seems to adapt, evolving with the times. You stand now in the Sahara, squinting at the horizon. Wind whistles through the vast emptiness, shaping the dunes with ancient fingers. You brush your hand across the ridged sand. Was it once a wall? A canal? Or just your imagination replaying Plato's echo? The thing about deserts, they keep secrets like the sea does. Only drier. And whether it's Africa or Antarctica, the theory hoppers, fringe researchers, and hopeful romantics will keep digging, physically or digitally, searching for that one shard. One fossilized doorknob. One GPS pin that proves it. Atlantis was real. Or at least real enough to keep us looking. You're standing in a candlelit stone hall. The air thick with pipe smoke and secrets. And someone in a wool robe is whispering about the true history of mankind. Welcome to the 20th century's strangest chapter in the Atlantis saga, where the lost city wasn't just a myth or a metaphor, but a political tool, a mystical obsession, and sometimes a passport to delusion. Let's start with a little-known footnote in weird history. In the 1930s, Atlantis became unexpectedly fashionable among Nazi occultists. Yep, in their quest to prove the supremacy of an ancient Aryan race. Key figures within the Third Reich latched onto Atlantis as evidence of a long-lost master civilization. According to this twisted logic, Atlanteans were Proto-Aryans who fled their sinking home and seeded superior cultures around the world. Never mind logic, science, or, decency. You step now into the eerie archives of the Unnatural, the Nazi research institute obsessed with ancestral heritage and ancient origins. They funded expeditions to Tibet, Iceland, and even South America, all in the hope of finding evidence of Atlantean descendants. Historians still argue whether these expeditions were serious science or just window dressing for ideology. Probably a bit of both, with a strong dash of delusion. And while this fringe corner darkened the legend, another side of the 20th century lit it up with neon. Cue the Theosophists, a spiritualist movement founded by Helena Blavatsky in the late 1800s. Theosophy merged Eastern philosophy, mysticism, and a whole lot of fantastical storytelling. Atlantis played a starring role. According to Blavatsky, the Atlanteans weren't just technologically advanced, they were spiritually evolved. Some had psychic powers, some had 4 arms, some accidentally blew themselves up with advanced energy weapons. So basically, Atlantis is a Marvel origin story. Her disciple, Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, took it even further. In trance-like states, Cayce claimed to access the Akashic Records, a sort of cosmic library of everything that's ever happened, and gave vivid accounts of Atlantis. He described crystal power plants, death lasers, and flying machines, and he prophesied that parts of Atlantis would rise again in the 1960s, specifically near Bimini in the Bahamas. Remember the Bimini Road? Quirky tidbit. Cayce predicted we'd find a Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx in Egypt, left behind by Atlanteans who fled the disaster. To this day, alternative historians and mystic YouTubers insist there's a hidden chamber full of Atlantean knowledge under those paws. Mainstream Egyptologists politely, but firmly, disagree. It gets weirder. In the 1970s and 80s, New Age thinkers picked up the Atlantean baton. Suddenly, it was all about past life regressions, crystal healing, and psychic memory downloads. People would remember being high priests or underwater architects. Atlantis became less a place and more a vibe, a metaphor for lost spiritual wisdom. A Pinterest board of enlightenment and consequence. Meanwhile, sci-fi writers ran with it. Atlantis appeared in Stargate, Doctor Who, Aquaman, And of course, Disney's own steampunk Atlantis adventure. The legend was recast over and over, sometimes as utopia, sometimes as cautionary tale, sometimes as underwater alien base with suspiciously symmetrical doors. And yet, beneath all the pop culture glitter, you hear that same quiet note. Loss, longing, the ache for a time before the fall. Historians still argue whether these reinterpretations do more harm than good. Some say they distract from real archaeology and mislead curious minds. Others argue they keep the myth alive, adapting it to each generation's fears and dreams. After all, isn't that what myths are for? You sit now in a basement filled with dusty books, esoteric symbols drawn on chalkboards, and a half-finished model of a spiraled city carved from foam. Someone is whispering about Lemuria, Mu, and the Atlantean frequency. You nod, trying not to laugh, but part of you wonders, what if even a sliver of it were true? The strange thing is, the more Atlantis was twisted, exploited, or commercialized, the more people kept coming back to the core idea, a powerful, beautiful civilization, undone not by nature, but by itself. A city punished not for failure, but for arrogance. You lean back, eyes half closed, and you can almost hear it again, the song of a lost city, echoing across time, hijacked by everyone from tyrants to channelers. And maybe, just maybe, it still has something to say. You float now. Not through water, but through time and thought, drifting past ruins that may never have existed. Let's imagine for a moment, just for tonight, that Atlantis was real. Not just real in the myth-making, metaphor-molding way, but real as in cities, streets, marketplaces, and people with lives and laundry and taxes. What would that society have actually looked like? You walk through a bustling Atlantean harbor. Sailors unload exotic goods from ships made of some advanced resin that resists rot. Scholars argue whether ancient civilizations could have developed seafaring technology more advanced than we've given them credit for. Consider this. We've discovered ancient maps that hint at an understanding of global coastlines centuries before modern navigation. So it's not unthinkable that Atlantis, if real, was a maritime power. Plato described a kingdom of incredible wealth. But wealth doesn't just fall from the sky, or rise from the seabed. It suggests commerce, industry, perhaps a proto-banking system. You imagine silver tokens stamped with tridents, loans measured not in coins, but in amphorae of olive oil or lengths of dyed cloth. Maybe they even had a version of stocks, shares in merchant ships. Perhaps, or civic projects like temple renovations. Hey, if the Romans had complex contracts, why not the Atlanteans? And what about their daily lives? You step into a market square. The smells, warm bread, roasted meats, something fishy with too many herbs. Children dart between stalls. Artists sell polished stones with glowing script etched into them. Are they charms? Data tablets? You'll never know. But you feel the hum of a society not just alive, but layered, one that sings of cultural complexity. Quirky twist? Some theorists speculate Atlantis had a kind of social caste system based on spiritual rank. The closer your bloodline was to Poseidon, the more perks you had, like access to inner sanctums or free dolphins on your birthday. It's absurd, but also exactly the kind of bureaucratic nonsense human societies love to invent. And that brings us to governance. According to Plato, Atlantis had 10 royal houses, each ruling part of the island but pledging loyalty to a central king. Sound familiar? That's not far off from how the Hellenistic kingdoms functioned centuries later. Or even how the Holy Roman Empire was structured. A federation of power, loosely glued together by shared myth and uneasy alliances. Historians still argue whether Plato was simply projecting his ideal government onto Atlantis, a utopia built for debate rather than documentation. But again, if we indulge the what if, it makes sense that such a system would rise in a thriving island nation. Maritime cultures often require cooperation, Trade routes need protection. Docks need maintenance. Storms don't care about borders. And then there's the tech. This is where people get wild. Some say Atlantis harnessed crystal energy, yes, literal glowing crystals, as power sources. Others suggest wireless electricity, levitating transportation, or weaponized sound waves. While most of this belongs in the fun but nope pile, there's a kernel of real wonder. Ancient cultures did use unexpected tech. The Antikythera mechanism, for instance, was an ancient Greek analog computer lost in a shipwreck and only rediscovered in the 20th century. If such devices existed, how many more are buried beneath time or ocean? You crouch in a stone chamber lined with pipes that once carried hot and cold water, an Atlantean bathhouse. Steam curls around your face. You remember the Minoans had plumbing. The Romans built aqueducts. Why couldn't Atlantis have pushed even further? The thing is, if Atlantis were real, it wouldn't be magic. It would be familiar, brilliant, flawed, human. You'd find jealous siblings, frustrated workers, hungry poets, corrupt officials, and market vendors who never shut up. There would be festivals, but also debt, innovation, but also inequality. Because paradise isn't perfect. It's just what we want to be perfect. And maybe that's the most important detail. Atlantis, as a hypothetical civilization, would have mirrored our own contradictions. Greatness tethered to downfall, wisdom shadowed by pride. You pause on a hill at sunset, overlooking what might have been the capital. The city gleams in gold and amber. Bells ring, boats drift into harbor. Somewhere, a child laughs. You breathe it in, this speculative anthropology, this fictional memory. It feels real. Almost. Until the tremor hits. And just like that, it slips away again. You hover now between truth and myth. Standing at the shoreline of a story that just won't die. Atlantis, whether real, imagined, or something in between, has somehow managed to outlive civilizations, survive religions, and stay culturally viral for over 2 millennia. That's no small feat for a place that may have never existed at all. Let's talk about why. You sit in a modern library, cool air humming from vents overhead, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly, and a dozen books open before you, each one telling a different version of Atlantis. To some, it was a super civilization with the wisdom of the gods. To others, a metaphor warning against pride and overreach. To modern storytellers, it's everything from a plot device to a full-blown fantasy franchise. There's an Atlantis for everyone. Pop culture has happily made Atlantis its own. In the 20th century alone, it showed up in superhero backstories, Aquaman, naturally, cartoons, blockbuster movies, novels, and even pop songs. You hum the tune of that one 90s hit called Return to Atlantis. Yes, that existed. Atlantis has become cultural shorthand for lost potential, mysterious origins, and high-drama ruin. Basically, it's the Beyoncé of ancient urban legends. Historians still argue whether this persistent popularity reflects a universal human yearning for paradise, for lost knowledge, for redemption. But in coffee shops and Reddit threads, one thing's clear: Atlantis has taken on a life of its own. And then there are the spiritual seekers. You scroll through YouTube videos and TikTok accounts claiming Atlantean DNA activations, offering past life readings from when you were a crystal architect in the 8th dimension. You chuckle, but part of you understands. The idea of Atlantis has become more than a place. It's a placeholder for hope. A way to believe that once we were better, that maybe someday we could be again. Quirky fact of the day? There's a town in Florida called Atlantis. It has a golf course, palm trees, and 0 giant tridents. Still, its founders clearly couldn't resist naming their sleepy suburb after the most glamorous ghost city in history. And that's the point. Atlantis isn't just under the sea anymore. It's in our maps, minds, and memes. You pause now, standing at the edge of the metaphor. If Atlantis was a real place, then we've failed to find it. But if it was never real, if it was just a parable spun by Plato, then we've been chasing a dream for 2,000 years. Either way, that dream has shaped architecture, literature, fantasy, and philosophy, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. Even science is drawn in. Oceanographers still scan the seafloor. Archaeologists still argue over submerged ruins. Every few years, a new, "This could be Atlantis," headline emerges, usually followed by disappointment. But always with a flicker of, what if? You stand now on the deck of an imaginary vessel, part submarine, part metaphor, gazing down into the abyss. There's something there, maybe not bricks or bones, but something, a shimmer, a shadow of something forgotten, something that, in all its mystery, continues to call out. You lean over the railing. The ocean breathes, and then it begins to fade, so now, you ease back into your pillow. The light's a little dimmer than before. The fan whispering soft rhythms against the quiet. Atlantis drifts away behind you. Not sunken, but suspended, in thought, in story, in that liminal space between dream and history. The marble streets grow fainter. The canals, once glittering under golden light, are now gentle ripples in your memory. The people, the voices, the laughter of a market at noon, all dissolving like mist touched by morning sun. And that's okay. Some stories aren't meant to be solved, just held, gently, like water in cupped hands. You breathe in slowly, exhale deeper, let go of sonar maps, volcanic theories, ancient texts, let go of the need to prove, to find, to define, because Atlantis isn't a city you walk through. It's a mood, a question, a kind of echo that lingers in the quiet corners of the mind. Maybe the true secret of Atlantis is that it was never meant to be found. Maybe it was just meant to remind us of what we could be, at our best. And our most fragile. You feel the tide retreating. The story slipping beneath the waves once more. No need to follow it tonight. Just float. Let your thoughts settle like sand. Let your breath match the rhythm of imagined waves. And sleep, knowing that somewhere, in the sea between myth and memory, Atlantis is still out there, waiting.